Night train to Mundofina, night train to the end, running hard and running fast to meet my future and away from my past, taking the gamble that cannot last, night train to the end.
This is the Frater SH Night Show, and our first article is Eerie Black Triangle seen hovering in the sky over Pakistan for hours. An intriguing piece of footage from Pakistan shows what appears to be a black triangular object hovering in the sky, and the witness says that it remained in place for hours. The puzzling sighting reportedly occurred on Tuesday evening in the city of Islamabad, shortly after Arslan Warwick had landed a drone that had been operating months earlier. Looking up at the sky, he was astonished to see the curious object and began filming it with his cell phone. The fairly long video provides a remarkable perspective of not only the UFO but also of Warwick's bewilderment, as he can't help but expresses amazement at what is in the sky. "This is unbelievable," he marveled, arguing that the oddity was neither a drone nor a bird. Amusingly, even though he was observing an unidentified flying object in the sky, Warwick seemed to almost grow bored with the sighting, as he muses that it just sits there not doing anything. I wanted to do something, like whiz by or something. Alas, the peculiar object remained stationary for the duration of Warwick's sighting, which is somewhat amazing in and of itself, but since he claims that the UFO was visible for at least 2 hours until the sun was down, and it was too dark to see. As for why he didn't send his drone up to look at the UFO, he lamented that the UAV had no juice in it, or else he could have taken some epic footage. What do you make of the mysterious object that Warwick caught on film? Okay, so the next article is Can Medieval Sleeping Habits Fix America's Insomnia? The history of first sleep and second sleep holds surprising lessons about pre-industrial life, 21st century anxiety, and the problem with digging for utopia in the past. At 3 a.m., I'm jolted awake. The room is dark and still. I grab my phone and scan sports scores and Twitter. Still awake, a faceless physician whispers in my mind to overcome middle of the night insomnia. Experts say you ought to get out of bed. I get out of bed, I pour a glass of water and drink it. I go back to bed still awake. Perhaps you know the feeling. Like millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of people around the world that suffer from so-called mid-sleep awakenings that can keep them up for hours. One day, the person in the article was researching nocturnal issues when they discovered a cottage industry of writers and sleep hackers who claimed that sleep is a nightmare because of the Industrial Revolution. Of all things, essays in The Guardian and New York Times Magazine recommended an odd fix for restlessness called segmented sleep. In pre-modern Europe, and perhaps centuries earlier, people routinely went to sleep around nightfall and woke up around midnight, only to go back to sleep a few hours later until morning. They slept sort of like I do, but they were zen about it. Then the hackers claim modernity came along and ruined everything by pressuring one to sleep in one big chunk. The romanticization of pre-industrial sleep fascinated me. It also snapped into a popular template of contemporary internet analysis. If you experience a moment's unpleasantness, first blame modern problems. So I reached out to Roger Eckhart, the historian whose work broke open the field of segmented sleep more than 20 years ago. In the 1980s, Eckhart was researching a book about nighttime before the Industrial Revolution one day in London. Reading through public records, he stumbled on reference to first sleep and second sleep in a crime report from the 1600s. He had never seen the phrases before. When he broadened his search, he found mentions of first sleep in Italian and French and even Latin. He found documentation in Africa, Middle East, South Asia, and Latin America. When the sleep was divided into two-act play, people were creative of how they spent the intermission. They didn't have anxious conversations with imaginary doctors. They actually did something during this Dorville or wake sleep. People got up to pee, hung out by the fire, had or played or prayed. They reflected on their dreams and commingled with the spiritual realm, both the divine and the diabolical. In the 1540s, Martin Luther wrote of his strategies to ward off the devil. Almost every night when I wake up, I instantly chase him away with a fart. Today's sleep writers often wield Eckhart's research to suggest that segmented sleep, or as Eckhart calls it, biphasic, two-phase sleep, is old and one sleep is new. And therefore, today's sleepers are doing it wrong. But that's not the full story, he told me. Re-industrial sleep was nothing to romanticize. Death stalked our slumber for centuries. Late night crime was rampant, and the home itself was a death trap, as slapdash construction left houses vulnerable to fire, leaking roofs, terrible heat, or cold, what Elkridge calls the trifecta of early modern entomology, fleas, lice, and bedbugs. And as for the romantic French Dorville, it was functionally a second work day for many women who rose at midnight to finish domestic chores and ancient sportifics such as poisonous leaves and various opiate concoctions were roughly as likely to kill you as they were to induce REM. Beginning in the 1700s, the Industrial Revolution, its light, its caffeine, its clocks, and above all, its work schedules, took Europe's biphasic sleep to its hairy arms and mushed the two phases together. A surgent economy had a virtual productivity and instilled an increasing sense of time consciousness. In the West, Eckhart told me, by the mid-1800s, early rising movements have taken off in England and America. New artificial lights, delayed bedtimes, while new factory schedules required early waking. The lit world altered our eternal clocks too. Every time we turn on a light, we are inadvertently taking a drug that affects how we will sleep. Charles Kaiser, a Harvard sleep scientist, has said that when a 1990 study at the National Institute of Mental Health derived a cohort of male subjects of late at night, their sleep became segmented after a few weeks. This makes it sound like a segmented sleep is humanity's natural habitat, and that the Industrial Revolution and modern capitalism despoiled our perfect rest. But humans have never had a universal method of slumber. A 2015 study of hunter-gatherer societies in Tanzania and Namibia in Bolivia found that most foragers enjoyed one long sleep. 2 years later, another study found that a rural Mexican in Madagascar practiced segmented sleep. 2 years after that, a study found that the indigenous residents of Tanya of the South Pacific largely had one and uninterrupted sleep. Even within pre-industrial Europe, sleep contained multitudes. Reviewing the diaries of European writers such as Samuel Pepys, James Boswell, Eckhart found early allusions to unified sleep, summarized this complicated literature, told me that patterns of sleep in non-Western cultures appear to have were much more diverse than those in Europe, but that they were truly diverse everywhere. There is no evidence that the sleep was universally segmented. There is also little evidence that segmented sleep is better. A 2021 meta-analysis of studies on basic on biphasic sleep schedules found that segmented sleeping subjects actually reported lower sleep quality and spent more time in later stages of sleep. One reasonable takeaway is that biphasic sleep is like anarchical foraging. Both might have well served some ancient populations some of the time, but neither of them offers a clear solution to modern problems. I asked Kirch this question, as the historian was most associated with biphasic sleeping. Had his research encouraged him, a spouse or a friend, to become a biphasic sleeper? Not at all, he said. At no time in history have conditions of human slumber been better than today. More than 99% of our ancient ancestors, we have better beds, better blankets, better houses, and fewer late-night pests. That the purpose of sleep is mental and physical well-being. There's a very good reason to believe that uninterrupted sleep at night best achieves that outcome, Eckert told me. And that is all for today. Thank you and have a great night.